So today I'm delighted to have four eminent speakers to really think through, well, what did we achieve in COP26? And what does it mean for businesses in particular in our region? And what can we do more tangibly as we go forward? And I'm delighted to have with me Mark Doddwell, who's Director of Climate Propositions Team at NatWest. And NatWest, of course, made a very big decision to steer their organization in a way that's aligned with sustainable business and environmental sustainability. And he very much is at the heart of thinking through what it means for NatWest when thinking about sort of carbon tracking, clean transport, clean energy, buildings and green finance. So we're going to be talking to Mark, and joining Mark will be Amelia Heimler, who's the Sustainability Finance Manager as part of the Sustainable Finance Group. Unfortunately, Rishi Medlani couldn't join us today, but Amelia's from the same team, and so we're delighted to have her join us today. In addition to Amelia, we've got Chris Walkingshaw, who is Operations Director at Motorsport, but more importantly, he's passionate about sustainability, and that's part of his portfolio as well. And of course, when we think about motorsport, we think about petrol, diesel, and all those sort of carbon-based fuels. So this is something that's very tangible in terms of sort of business impact for Chris. So I'm very interested to learn how Chris and Motorsport are handling that transition. Last but by no means least, we've got Professor Bill Collins, award authority in atmospheric chemistry and Earth modeling systems. So delighted to have Bill, and Bill will be giving, from a scientific perspective in terms of what was achieved and whether it's sufficient or not when we're thinking about what we have to do actually in order to mitigate the effects of climate change. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark. I've got his slides, so I'll just stop sharing these and I'll share his slides. So if you bear with me for a minute.
Thanks, Gurpreet. While you do that, I'll just say good afternoon to everybody. It's good to join you this afternoon. And Amelia, as Gurpreet has said, is with me. So my role within the climate propositions team within NatWest, Gurpreet touched on the five key areas that we're focused on. My area of, I have to say, expertise, or certainly my area of focus for the last 18 months and heading into next year, is around clean transport propositions and clean energy. But I was specifically asked to come and join you today to talk about clean transport, some of the work that we're doing to try and educate our customers in that sort of future mobility, what that will do for business, what that will do for commercial organisations across the UK, and just give a bit of a flavour as to the sort of things that the businesses need to think about. So I'll do that, but before I do that, Amelia is with us, as Gurpreet has just said. We were a principal partner of COP. I'm not going to steal any of Amelia's thunder, but Amelia's here to give us an overview of kind of our thoughts, our views on the outcome of COP, and our senior executive team and some of Amelia's team spent quite a bit of time actually at COP, attending in person. So without further ado, I'll hand to Amelia, and then in a moment I'll take you through the future mobility stuff. Amelia.
Thanks, Mark, and hi everyone. Great to be here. And as we said at the beginning, Rishi unfortunately can't be here, but slightly big shoes to fill, but hopefully I can do the job. So as Mark said, I sit within the climate strategy team within NatWest Group. So our role in that team is to push the ambition of the bank in terms of our climate strategy and help shape the agenda for us going forward. So I'm here just to talk a little bit about my experiences at COP and what our kind of takeaways are. So as Mark said, I had the privilege of actually being there at COP for a few days. And it was a great, incredible experience to be there as a young woman. I was actually there hosting an event as part of the fringe activity, so not within the green or the blue zone, which was the main centre for COP, but there was obviously lots of activity going on the side. So we were hosting that, and it was all on the topic of institutional activism, so how you can create change from the grassroots up within any organisation. That was going on while the protests were happening literally right outside. So we had 100,000 people marching by, which was amazing to see. Definitely had some mixed feelings about how it was all going. I mean, you can see clearly that people are angry and passionate, and rightly so, and we need that. My background's geography. I remember studying climate change when I was at middle school and before, and then, you know, no one was really talking about global warming. The focus was on the fact that fossil fuels were going to run out one day, not the fact that it was creating climate change. So it's incredible to see the transition and how the focus has changed. And so it was a real privilege to see all that. Obviously, a lot has come from COP, a lot of content to process, a lot of huge announcements, and a lot to get your head around. I won't touch on all of them. I'm definitely not an expert, but there is a lot to kind of get our heads around. But I would say that obviously COP26 on the whole, it was definitely the beginning. It's definitely not the end, and the focus should be on continuing the momentum that COP has created and started. And I suppose I would just say that before I go on to what COP means for potentially business, my personal takeaways of COP are the level of engagement that it's created. I think it's really the fact that it was front page news basically the whole 2 weeks is amazing, and it's just got that it's galvanized everyone across society is more interested in talking about it more. I would counter that with the fact that it's demonstrated the scale of the challenge, and I think people are waking up to how much work we have to do and how big this problem is, essentially, and how it impacts. We're starting to understand the kind of all the externalities that come off of it, and kind of understanding that global picture. You know, we heard the voices of the indigenous communities and the island states, passionate speeches from them talking about what climate change means for them, and it really is making it real. And I think that's what we need to start kind of thinking about more and more, because it's not just, you know, climate change, it's real and it's happening now to people out there and also domestically as well, and that will only increase. But then I would counter that again with my third takeaway, which is that it's a huge opportunity. So despite the doom and the gloom and some of the, you know, some people do turn off because it's just so overwhelming, I would say that I do definitely see the transition to a more sustainable future as just one huge opportunity. I don't really see any downsides. It's going to be hard, and there will be, you know, it will be a short-term cost, but I think long-term, it's going to be for the best. And to be honest, we don't have any other option. We have to sort this thing. If we don't, then it really is a case of fight or flight. So I would just then say, in terms of what it means, so obviously at a global level, we've seen that collaboration happening globally, the global diplomacy, all these kind of country pledges. So that's really great to see that happening. And then obviously those announcements then trickle down into what it means for the UK. And the UK government actually, in preparation for COP, actually announced a number of strategic policy announcements just before COP, including the heat and building strategy. Also earlier in the year, they announced their hydrogen strategy, and also their commitment to become the leader for green finance. So they're really the UK government will really try to position ourselves as the leader in this area. And to be honest, we're well placed to do that. We're one of the most developed, advanced, sophisticated countries in the world, and if we can set an example, then others will follow. I'll just give a quick example. A lot of people sometimes say to me, what's the point in the UK doing anything? We're so small, we contribute less than 1% of emissions, and don't quote me on that, but it is a small portion. What's the point of us doing anything when the likes of India and China are, you know, belching out loads of emissions? And I would just say to that, they will follow and we set an example and they will follow. A prime example of that is the wind technology. We pioneered that, and now China are one of the biggest producers of wind technology in the world. So it just goes to show that we are in a unique and privileged position to be able to set the strategy for the global arena, really. And so then lastly, what does this actually mean for business? So it was the first time this COP that finance and business played a huge role within COP itself. climate advisor, Lord Stern, said that it really was the first time business was involved within COP. So the fact that we had a seat at the table shows that business are listening and understanding that this affects us. It's not just a global thing. We need to act. We also saw a lot of collaborations and alliances coming together, and I think we're going to see more of that in business and commercial space. We saw the Powering Past Coal Alliance. We saw GFANS, which is the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. There's loads of these alliances out there, and I think we're just going to see more. One of our CEO's famous or favourite quotes is, "Climate is a team sport." We really need to work together to sort this thing. So the more we can put collaboration, even over competition when we need to, the faster we're going to get there. So that was the second piece. But I would also say that, it's great we're having alliances and it's great we're seeing these commitments, but we need to turn all that goodwill into action. And I think that's now where the position we're in right now. We need to continue the momentum of COP and actually now turn this into tangible action, which takes me to my next point, which is one of the other outcomes of COP was the shortening of timescales, which is there on that slide. So we're seeing now that the countries will be have committed to coming back on a yearly basis to talk about their plans. And I think, as it says there, we're going to be needing annual reporting and to kind of hold everyone to account, which is really what we need. So I've probably said enough about a number of things there, but I'm happy to leave it at that and take questions at the end, and I'll hand over to Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia. Gurpreet, if we can move to the next slide, please. So, as Amelia said, lots of focus and lots of input from us at COP. I've been working in the future mobility, clean transport space for the last 2 years within the bank. It's an area that we kind of highlighted that we really should be focused on. Transport has become the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the UK. And has overtaken energy and other some of the previous kind of large greenhouse gas emitters that have got their house in order. So we've been focused on this for the last 2 years. And at COP, we kind of showed our commitment there by signing the Declaration of Zero Emission Cars and Vans. And we also signed up to support the Green Finance Institute's Coalition for the Decarbonisation of Road Transport. But what we've been doing over the last 18 months is really starting to deliver some education to our customers, to commercial businesses that want to listen, just around future mobility and the disruption that's coming in this space. And talking to Gurpreet before today, it was thought it'd be good for me to bring some of that insight to this session. So, that disruption comes from the climate emergency. You have to have had your head buried well in the sand to have ignored that over the last couple of years. But the disruption's coming from government now. The Green Industrial Revolution paper was published last year. That was a 10-point plan. 4 points of that plan had transport within it. Earlier this year in the summer, the Transport Decarbonisation Plan was also published, and lots of, it's a 200-page document, 200-page plus, that outlines where we should be going with transport, what future mobility should look like. So disruption is definitely coming from central government. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we're also seeing drivers of change from some key other areas. Technology, absolutely. We'll talk in a moment. My presentation the next few slides will focus on electrification of vehicles for good reason. And the technology that's being designed and innovative changes happening in that space is being developed all the time. And it will continue to disrupt how future mobility and clean transport evolves over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And when it comes to consumer behaviour, like or loathe Greta, you can't take away what she has done for her generation and the focus that she has brought to consumer behaviour. And the other picture on the slide there, David Attenborough has been doing this for years. Greta's been doing it for a few years. David's been pushing this for years. And people like that are driving consumer behaviour change now. So that is having an impact in future mobility. And although we don't want to say the COVID word, we have to. COVID has changed the way people move at the moment. Public transport has really kind of dropped away. And more people have jumped back into internal combustion engine vehicles because they don't want to get on public transport. But equally, during sort of lockdowns, we saw lots and lots of people moving to active travel, cycling and walking to avoid enclosed spaces. So COVID's having an impact as well. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So with all that change coming, what does that mean for business? Well, transport features, for virtually every business, transport features somewhere. And as a business, you need to kind of figure out, where does transport feature in your value chain? Is it the vehicles that you own, or is it in your sort of scope 3 emissions that are kind of linked to supply chain, linked to value chain? So does transport feature in your inbound logistics? Does it feature in your operations or outbound logistics? Marketing and sales teams, if you've got those driving around the country, it's going to feature there. Similarly for service. And that sort of prompts a question of, what vehicles does your company run today? And where do your goods or your people or your services travel in those vehicles? And another area around transport that you need to focus on is staff commuting. We are all commuters, admittedly not in a global pandemic, but we are all commuters, and how we travel to and from our place of work generates emissions that contribute to your business's emissions. So these are all questions that a business needs to think about. Next slide, please. So what is future mobility? In our world, we see that as autonomous vehicles, mobility as a service, and electrification. And for the purposes of time, I'm just going to focus on electrification today. Happy to come back at a later date and talk autonomous vehicles or mobility as a service. But if we can move on to the next slide, please. One of the key pieces of legislation that the government have introduced is that from 2030, all internal combustion engine cars and vans will be banned. New car sales will be banned. That is 8 years from now, 8 years and a month, let's say. This picture is a really interesting picture. This was Easter Day parade in New York. The picture on the left is 1900. There's one motor vehicle and hundreds and thousands of horse-drawn carriages. Scroll forward 13 years and we've got the complete reverse. We've got one horse-drawn carriage and hundreds of cars, probably lots of them Model T Fords. That took 13 years. We have 8 years for the change that's happening now. People are already making that switch to electric vehicles. Hybrids will also be banned from 2035. I think it's fair to say that took the automotive industry by surprise when that was announced. But essentially, you won't be able to buy a new internal combustion engine car or van in 8 years' time. So you need to start to think about, when do you make that transition to electric? Now, some might say, well, it might be hydrogen. That's a fair assumption, but the automotive manufacturing businesses are investing billions into electric vehicles. They've already invested well over 300 billion globally. So we can just move to the next slide. I just wanted to share with you some high-level thoughts of what are the challenges to transitioning your fleet of maybe one or two vehicles, or any fleet larger than that. The key thing is when to swap. When's the right time to do it? Are they going to work for your business right now if you switch to electric vehicles? What's the cost of doing that? And there are incentives available. There are incentives available right now for purchasing of the vehicles. There are incentives available for the charging infrastructure that you need to support that switch. And leading on from that is fueling. How will you fuel those vehicles? Are you going to provide charge points at home for your staff that are driving company vehicles and taking them home? Are you going to give them charge points at their place where they live? Are you going to put charge points in the office? Are you going to provide for both? And over time, more and more of your customers, businesses' customers, are going to make that switch to electric vehicles. So you're going to provide charging for them when they're visiting your premises. And one of the other things we're talking to businesses around now is business processes will change. When you've got staff running around in cars and claiming petrol and diesel, it's very easy to just pay them a pence per mile. But you might have to give some thought to charging, if they're charging at home, how are you going to reimburse them for the cost that's going to be added to their electric bill? And I guess linked to that fueling strategy is energy supply. If you're going to start to install charge points at your home, at your business, then have you got the capacity on the grid in your sort of industrial area where your business is situated? The next challenge is around choice of vehicles, cars and LCVs. how many are out there, which ones are right for your business. We have seen in the past, and probably still a bit relevant now, is supply and demand, particularly in the LCV space. That it can be a struggle for smaller businesses to get hold of LCVs in the electric vehicle LCVs. And the final piece, and this kind of really brings it home, around suitable for requirements. A lot of businesses today are saying mileage range doesn't work. More and more vehicles that are coming out now, that mileage range is creeping up. Battery technology is improving, and we're starting to see a sort of parity with the amount of miles you would get out of a tank of petrol or diesel. But the real key one for me is clean air zones. And back to that question that I sort of posed at the start, where do your people, your goods, your services move? We are starting to see more and more clean air zones being rolled out. Ultra low emission zones in London have been there for a while and just expanded, controversially to some and pleasingly for others. But we will see in the Thames Valley region, as of next year, Oxford will become the first zero emission zone. So the clean air zones that are going in right now, in Birmingham, they were implemented this year. Bath implemented this year. They're chargeable clean air zones. So if you want to go in an internal combustion engine vehicle, you've got to pay. Once we start to see zero emission zones creep up, you won't be able to get into those cities and those towns that have got those installed in an internal combustion engine vehicle. So all of a sudden, there is a compelling reason to think about change. And I think that's probably enough from me. Hopefully that gives you a flavour of why it might be right to think about electrification, the challenges around it, and some of the questions you might need to ask yourself as businesses. But Gurpreet, back to you.
Super. Thanks very much, Mark. That's raised a lot of questions just in one aspect, which is the transition, particularly around mobility for a business. And so, there are, of course, the business, there are many, many different aspects in relation to decarbonisation or reducing your carbon footprint. And we'll come back to the sort of mobility side and with Chris when we talk about motorsport. But now I want to before I go to Bill, I'm going to pose a little poll for everyone. So what I'd like you to do is answer this question. So I'm going to launch this poll. Let's see what you think about the outcome yourself of COP26. So you should see a poll there with three options. About half of polled. So there's still a few people who haven't polled yet. So we've had 33, 76% have participated. Let's give it a couple more minutes or a few more seconds. Coming up to a minute, that should be enough. Okay, so we've come to a minute, and the result of that is that about a third, 32%, feel actually it was a good COP, there was a good progress made, and it was about the best that could practically be achieved. A higher proportion, 50%, were disappointed in the output. Some progress was made, but much, much more needs to be done. And actually a reasonably high percentage, around 17%, thought this was nowhere near enough. And Greta mentioned in her reports it was more blah, blah, blah. Interesting results, interesting result. I guess from where I sit, I would probably be in the disappointed category, where definitely progress made. But as Amelia was saying, we need to get those commitments that were pledged actually being delivered to or delivered on. So thank you very much for that. So let's now move actually to, I thought I'd shared the results, but you can see the results there. So those are the If you haven't seen them, there they are. So let's stop sharing and stop. So now I'm going to hand over to Bill. So Bill, as somebody who's sort of intimately connected with the science, from your perspective, what's your take on COP26? Was this good, solid progress? Could more have been achieved? How do you view it?
Well, thanks, Gilbert. So I've been a lead author on the IPCC reports. These are the big reports on the science that gets laid out every several years. In 2013, we were looking at climate scenarios that we sort of said, well, we'll choose a range somewhere between 2 and about 6 degrees of warming in the future. So this was about the 2013 report. Then in 2015, the Paris Agreement came up with this number of 1.5, which we were all quite surprised at as scientists, thinking that those aren't even the scenario, that's not even in the range we've been looking at. So even the fact that there's sort of the Paris started to become more ambitious was a good step. And about the time of the Paris Agreement, the countries made their first pledges, which would have led to a warming of about 3 degrees. Okay, so it's nothing like 1.5 degrees, but it's certainly not at the bigger end of the scenarios we've just been looking at in the climate report. And we've done more and more research on then to look at, you know, how does it matter quite whether it's 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. And we've really been able to pin down that it does matter. There's a big difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. And every fraction of a degree matters. So, you know, we think, oh, why are you worrying about decimal points? It's actually shown that, you know, each decimal point, or at least a few decimal points, really makes a difference in terms of our climate impact. So that's why it was really good that this 1.5 degree target was reaffirmed at Glasgow. Just putting more emphasis on that. It's possible that we might miss it, but just to have that goal to aim for, I think it's much better to aim for a 1.5 degree target and possibly slightly miss it than think about a 2 degree target, because then everyone thinks, oh, well, we'll try and do better. But in the end, you know what it's like. Everyone will just end up at 2 degrees. So I'm pleased they've agreed on the 1.5 degree target. Of course, what we have seen from the pledges that have come out from them, so we've gone down from the sort of the 3 degree pledges around 2015. The idea was that every 5 years people would ratchet up their ambitions. The 2020 pledges came out more like 2.7 degrees. Well, that's still a bit better than 3, but that's not really good enough. But the Glasgow, or the short-term targets from Glasgow have brought that down to 2.4 degrees. Okay, that's still not good enough. But now they're starting to bring in the long-term targets. So Amelia was talking about this. We've got the short-term targets to 2030. If you believe the longer-term targets, which, okay, maybe these politicians don't think they're going to be the ones that are putting those in place. But if you do believe the long-term targets would happen, then that's going to bring us down more like 2.1 degrees. And then if you take the most optimistic scenario, so a lot of these pledges are based from the low and middle income countries saying, we will do this if we get finance to do that, and if that happens, then that brings us down to 1.8. So that's still not 1.5 degrees. So that's, whether you count that on the disappointed side or not, it's certainly a lot better than where we were at the time of the Paris Agreement. And one key point I want to make about the science is a really big finding that's come over the last few years about climate science is that it's the total amount of carbon dioxide we emit that matters. So obviously we've got to get to net zero to stop that, but it's how much we emit before we get to net zero that will affect the amount of warming we get. So it's not so much the timing of net zero. So we've said we've got to get to net zero by 2050, but it's actually what do we do on the way to net zero. So this is why I would say the 2030 targets from Glasgow are disappointing. The longer term targets sounded quite good, but the shorter term targets where they've actually got to put in, and we're only talking 9 years away now to get to 2030, it could be that we end up by 2030, or at least the end of early 2030s, of emitting all we were allowed to, and then we just have to stop. So I think that's the real problem we yet haven't addressed. It's not how do we get to net zero, but really we've got 9 years left to get to 2030 targets, which we've said are a 45% reduction in emissions by 2030. So unless we can really make a big impact on that in 9 years, we said we didn't quite do enough at COP, so we're going to come back and do this in Egypt next year. Then it'll only be 8 years. So each year we've added too much. There's a year we wasted of adding too much. So if this needs to ramp up a lot more quickly, I would say, than it is currently. So that's my take. I think it's a lot better than we were at the time of Paris. We're not quite there yet.
Great, thank you, Bill. That again, I can think of lots of follow-up questions there in relation to the points that you made. But before we get onto that, and I'm sure the audience will have their thoughts on your comments there as well. I want to come to Chris Walkingshaw, and Chris, as I mentioned earlier, is the operations director at Motorsport UK. And Chris, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, but also, how is your company looking at this transition? Because you're in an archetypal kind of organization that's dependent on carbon fuels. So how are you looking at this? And do you see it as a cost? Do you see it as an opportunity? What's your view?
Well, firstly, thanks to everybody for asking us to join the panel. It's a privilege to join in the debate. Just to frame up the challenge that we face and explain a little bit about who we are. So we're the national governing body for motorsport in the UK. We sit underneath the FIA, who are the global governing body, and we're responsible for setting the regulations and giving permits for around 700 different motoring clubs in the UK to host around 5,000 events, and participating in those are around 50,000 registered competitors or license holders who sit within our banner. And we're located in Bicester, so we're firmly in the Thames Valley region. And in fact, that's quite deliberate, because if you draw a kind of 40-mile circle around Bicester or Banbury, you're in what's affectionately known as Motorsport Valley. Around 70% of all the businesses involved in motorsport actually reside in that space, and it's around a £9 billion industry for the UK alone in terms of its contribution. So it's really significant in terms of the role we have to play. To plagiarize Nelson Mandela, he very famously said, sport has the power to change lives, and we believe that we have a really important role to play in terms of people's ongoing behaviours, influenced buying trends. There was a very famous saying in motorsport, which is why lots of manufacturers got involved, was win on a Sunday, sell on a Monday. So people would see your car win the race and they'd flock to the showrooms on a Monday to buy your product. And that's why manufacturers are still involved. Motorsport has a great history for accelerating development of new technologies, demonstrating them on a world stage, which reaches eyeballs in the millions every weekend. And I think that's really where our focus is at the moment, is looking at these new evolving technologies that we've heard about today, whether that be hydrogen or electric. But also, I think with the timetable and the targets that the government are setting, it's inevitable that there may well need to be some solutions that bridge the gap. And certainly a really significant focus for our sector is sustainable fuels, and fuels that can ultimately deliver kind of zero tailpipe emissions. So we talked about the pool of people who compete in our sport, and they're all obviously very concerned because 99% of those competitors all own motorsport vehicles that are powered by internal combustion engines. So we need to seek solutions that will allow them to continue to compete and use those vehicles. with different fuel in that IC engine that might still make it possible to use. And we're seeing some fantastic breakthroughs. There are organisations like ProDrive just up the road in Banbury who've now developed a fully sustainable fuel that they're using in their Dakar off-road vehicle with no modifications to the engine, no drop in performance to the engine, but ultimately making a significant contribution to reducing the emissions. So I think there's certainly that that bridging step of how we can look at some of these alternatives. So we don't have to throw away the entire existing vehicle population and replace them all with EVs. That will come in time as the older vehicles phase out, but there's a life cycle to get out of all of that existing fleet of vehicles, and some of the advances in the motorsport industry will really help that. We're very fortunate in that, being a sport, we're a signatory of the UN Sport for Climate Action framework. That gives us a really good structure to follow in terms of how we approach the transition. And we also signed up just before COP26 to the Race to Zero, which actually puts some really clear defined targets around the changes that we'll have to make. Just to touch on something that Amelia and Bill said, I think those little differences are the things that can make a difference. That personal responsibility, the things that all of us as individuals can do, or everybody competing in our sport can do, collectively make a big difference. In sport, we focus on these marginal gains all of the time to get that peak performance. And I think that's a really important aspect that people can take from sport into this aptly named conference today, the climate emergency. Again, we saw what motorsport and what society as a collective can do when they have an emergency to respond to, like the pandemic earlier this year and into last year. When we start to consider the climate emergency under the same threat level, I think the speed at which we can introduce these new technologies and we can change is possible.
Super, thank you, Chris, and no doubt the audience will have, I'm sure, will have questions for you. I want to go back to Mark quickly, and Amelia in particular. Listening to what Bill was saying in terms of, the ambitions and where we're at around keeping the temperature rise to, around about 1.5, and that, having that ambition. And on our part, and the part that we play, and the reason why this is, as Amelia was saying, it's important that we set the standard, if you like, around the world. Do you think businesses locally that you deal with, Mark, are taking this seriously enough?
I think they're probably in three buckets.
Mm-hmm.
There are those that absolutely are. And are already starting on that journey of know they've got to do something and are on it. Mm-hmm. There's the next group that know they've got to do something but don't know where to start, and I do hear that quite regularly. I know I've got to do something on a net zero journey, not sure how I get going, and some of that's coming from supply chain. So in all sectors, it's a supply chain. The large corporates at the top of supply chain have sustainability on the boardroom agenda. They have it in their strategy. And the smaller SMEs further down the chain who probably but maybe don't think about this, it's now being forced upon them coming through the supply chain. So we're seeing that. And the third bucket, unfortunately, is the climate deniers. And I don't need to do anything. I'm only a small cog in a very large wheel, and therefore anything I do won't matter. So I think our customers are in three different buckets, and actually, it's our job to educate them. There's a question on how I saw on the chat just a moment ago, how's NatWest sort of engaging with its corporate customers, its commercial customers in doing this? And we do that through our relationship teams. Not every customer, depending on how large they are, gets a relationship manager. So we're building digital kind of solutions to help those customers that don't have relationship managers. But where we've got relationship managers that look after, 50 or 100 customers, we're educating them so that they can educate their customers. And my role in my team is to build those tools that help those customers with carbon tracking, with different things that they can then do to drive down their emissions from transport, from buildings, from energy. So that's how we approach it. I don't know, Amelia, if you would add anything to that.
No, I would agree with that. I'd just build on that by saying that the SME market poses one of the biggest opportunities for us in the UK. I think a lot of the research we've done shows that that's the space where we can drive down and decarbonise quickly, but they're the ones that don't have the tools and the knowledge to know what to do. And so we've actually released a report last month, which was co-authored with McKinsey, called our Springboard Report to Sustainable Recovery, which literally looks at the how we can unlock the opportunity within the SME space. And it found that 6 million small to medium-sized enterprises can achieve 50% of the UK's net zero decarbonisation goals, so long as they receive the right knowledge and funding and training. So it just shows there's a huge opportunity here, and we're really working with our customers to try and bridge that gap and help them and support them and show them how we can work together and how we can help them to reach their climate goals and decarbonise ultimately. But it is a huge opportunity. And sadly as well, one of the other findings of this report was that, like I was saying at the beginning, it is an opportunity, but these SMEs, it found that less than 10% of SMEs see climate action as a source of growth. So again, it's that kind of making people realise and making businesses recognise the opportunity that sits within, the transition. So it's learning, and we want to take our customers on that journey with us.
Brilliant. I want to open up now to sort of general Q&A. So, Catherine, I know you've been sort of watching the chat window for questions and things. Can I start with those?
So yeah, because a huge bank of questions now. So can I start with Adrian Lawson? He's asked a couple of questions. The first one is a bit of a contentious one. So can I put this one to Mark and see if you've got something to add on this?
Yep.
So Adrian would like to ask about the funding of fossil fuel businesses by NatWest, especially coal and Glencore, and how long before you stop. So do you have any input on that?
I might let Amelia come in here, because that was one of our outputs from COP. I'm going to dodge that one and pass it straight to Amelia.
Go for it, Amelia. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So yeah, obviously coal and oil and gas, these fossil fuels are a priority and part of our climate strategy, alongside the opportunity piece, which is definitely my area, is looking at the risk side. And we want to try and reduce our exposure to these areas and ultimately end funding for these for harmful activity, essentially. So one of the announcements that we made around the time of COP was that NatWest has joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance, so the PPCA, to advance the transition away from coal. So as part of this, we're going to ultimately phase out from coal by 2030. That's the ultimate end date. But we have interim targets as well. So, or not interim targets, not interim deadlines, essentially. So I'm just going to read out from our policy here. So if we plan to phase out from coal for UK and non-UK customers who have a UK coal production, coal-fired generation and coal-related infrastructure by the 1st of October by 2024. And the subsequent question might be, why is it not sooner? And I would say that, we have a responsibility to support our customers' transition. And you might have heard of this concept of a just transition. It wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't be socially responsible to just divest or let go of these customers who employ thousands of people. We need to support them on their journey to transition. And also we're looking at credible transition plans as well. So we've developed a methodology to assess what a credible transition plan is. So we want to help our customers on that journey. So yeah, that would be what I'd say to that.
Thanks very much, Amelia. Another question from Adrian, which is quite different. I'm going to go back to you, Mark, but also Chris, you might want to put something in on this. Any thoughts on reducing the need to travel and vehicle sharing, car clubs and last mile delivery from hubs using cargo bikes? So looking at alternatives to motorised transport and minimising need.
Yeah, and apologies, my dog started to bark in the background, so I apologise for that noise now. It's a really good question. Yes, a lot of my work is focused on EV transition, but equally we're very much kind of aligned to the work that's the growing micromobility industry, and how do we support kind of e-bike sharing, e-scooter sharing, cargo bikes. How do we support that, consumers being able to afford those, get into those, and these are all things that we're looking at. And I think I don't know if it was in that question. There's another question. What we are doing as an organisation is absolutely trying to educate our staff on thinking differently about travel. We've engaged with a company called Mobility Ways. They're specialists. They actually originate from the company LiftShare that have been in operation for 20 odd years. They are now helping large corporates like ourselves, large employers with lots of employees, on looking at how people commute to work and how do we reduce that emissions from commuting. Commuting emissions makes up 25% of that 27% total greenhouse gas emissions from transport. So they're working with us on our head office in Edinburgh, where there's 4,500 people work there. And we are kind of looking at alternative modes of commuting for customers, which includes lift share, which includes public transport, which includes bike sharing, e-bikes, all of that kind of thing. So it absolutely is. We're not just focused on electric vehicles. We recognise that there's, 66% of all car journeys in this country are less than 5 miles. 38% of all car journeys in the UK are under 2 miles. We have a culture of jumping in the car and just using the car for every journey. And we're absolutely determined to work on alternatives. And I am an active cyclist. I cycle huge miles every year, and I'm with Adrian that we need to do more in that space. So I don't know if Chris has got anything to add to that kind of thought process.
Yeah, I would just say in terms of our own business, again, there were some good things that came out of the pandemic, believe it or not. So as a sporting governing body, we're made up of a whole series of committees. We've got around 35 specialist committees that meet 3 or 4 times a year, made up of 30 people to talk about all the different issues in our sport. And we had to teach everybody how to do what we're doing right now, which was communicate online during the pandemic. And I'm really pleased to say that, we haven't reverted back to all of those people jumping in their car and driving down to our nice new office here in Bicester. It's great to welcome them maybe once a year and still have that kind of collegiate collaboration. But we've converted all of the other committee meetings now to online meetings, which is just saving a massive amount of unnecessary travel and actually making the meetings better attended, because people haven't got to jump in an airplane or a train and come to them. In a previous life, I worked as with a technology business looking after some startups and investment funds, and there's so many great schemes out there for businesses, like Mark talked about. There's last mile solution type companies, all kinds of grants and schemes and catapult funding and all kinds of different things. And we actually we ran a competition which was co-sponsored by NatWest a few years back, which awarded the top prize winner was a last mile solution electric cargo bike company based at Oxfordshire again. So there's loads of these types of solutions popping up. We've just got to get them out there faster and adopt them and change how people think and change their behaviours. So those are possible solutions to the problem.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I'd just like to go back to Mark with another question from Nicola Ellen, one of our partners at Shoesmiths. So she's asking, is there any government guidance that you could refer us to that would enable companies to investigate opportunities in relation to electrification of vehicles that would assist in consideration by, e.g., HR benefits and estate management teams within businesses?
You were talking, Mark, about, I was just going to add to that, if I may. Sorry, I was jumping in, because you were talking about, should companies be paying for electrification charges at home and electricity at home? So we are doing elements of this in HR benefits, and I'm really keen to understand what sort of guidance there is out there that I can refer our HR teams to.
There's some government, there is obviously on lots of the gov.co.uk sites, there's lots of kind of guidance. I'm happy to pick up with you offline, Nicola, and talk to you Amelia touched on, it is all around collaboration, and as a group we can't fix everything, and we're collaborating. We have a partnership with Octopus Energy, who are helping us with the charging infrastructure, solutions for our customers. We're partnered with Microsoft on carbon tracking and how we build out solutions for customers there. So there's definitely stuff that I know we could probably help you with there, Nicola. So happy to catch up with you offline. With
the group generally, it's all about trying to leverage change, isn't it? So I found your comments really interesting. So just want to think how we could try and look at that. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And actually, I wonder whether we could do something as Ethical Reading, like maybe there's something that you could share with us, Mark, even write a blog post, for example, to follow up on some of these things, and then that would share it more widely.
Yeah, sure, happy to.
Just to tell Nicola.
No, sorry, I wasn't meaning to exclude anybody else. So no, that's fine.
That's brilliant, thank you.
The other thing I was thinking, Mark, was potentially around the carbon tracking piece. Because I think, if there is, I know you're working with Microsoft on that, but if that's made available at, a reasonable cost or even free of charge, a simple carbon tracker for a SME organization that can't really afford some of the very expensive dashboards that are available today. That would make a huge difference to them, because then they at least, when the reality is once you know, it's a bit like your home smart meter. Once you know what you use, you can start to improve it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we have a Kogo app, which is a consumer app, which is out there live now. That's with our retail customer base. We're also working with Kogo sort of on SME. We're working with Microsoft on kind of larger commercial corporate sized businesses. So a lot of those are just currently in pilot at the moment, Gurpreet, but as and when you'll see those come out of pilot and into sort of national launch and widening. Yeah, we can absolutely kind of share that with you.
Brilliant.
I've got a great question here from Tim Dixon at the University of Reading. So he's saying it's for NatWest and motorsport, so I'll open it up to any of you guys. So post-COP, what is the most important thing we need to happen right now for businesses to work together to help us to drive down emissions to net zero by 2030, especially in Reading? So that's a nice one about collaboration and local. Who would like to jump in on that?
I'll give that a go, and then I can see Mark's nodding there. I'd say the first thing to do is think about what your climate strategy is within your own organisation, and making sure that you're comfortable with it, that it's ambitious, firstly, that you actually got a climate strategy, and secondly, that it's kind of up to date, ambitious, and you're comfortable that it's doing what it should be doing. And one of the pillars that we have of our climate strategy within NatWest is getting our own house in order. So that's our kind of right to play, really. We can't be talking to our customers telling them what they should be doing in terms of climate until we have our own operations in order. And by that I mean getting them to net zero. So we have an ambition. We got to net zero in terms of emissions for our own direct footprint in 2020, and now we want to be kind of climate positive by 2025. So I'd say definitely think about what your strategy is, how you might decarbonize your business model. And then once you've set that up, it's about taking it to that next level and helping your customers transition. And that's where the multiplier effect begins. And also going back to a point that was raised, it's about learning from others as well. I think people are starting to realize that collaboration can actually and should take precedent over competition sometimes. So it's useful to look at what our competitors are doing, to learn from them, and then form alliances. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to see more of this happening. And so those alliances are going to be really important to kind of push the market. And also, once those alliances are formed, potential to influence government and lobby. So I'd say that looking at your climate strategy, thinking about what you can do internally and then with your customers and then with the market as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Amelia. Actually, I'd like to just flag out something quickly that we're doing at Ethical Reading, connecting sustainability champions at various organisations. So that is actually a way for people to connect with other people who are personally passionate about helping their organisation become more sustainable, and then some of those synergies could start to happen. So if you have a look on our website, look on the sustainability section, and you can sign up there, and that's a way that people can start connecting and making some of those cool things happen. Can I just bring in Alina Scuba here? She's another NatWest person that we've got on the call, but she's not actually one of the speakers. Because there's something I wanted to ask that's related to you there, Alina.
Yeah, I'm
So I
here.
know
Yeah.
she's involved with a sustainability group for NatWest in the Thames Valley. And can you tell us a little bit about what NatWest is doing for customers in the Thames Valley that are really passionate about doing more onto the sustainability side?
Of course. Thank you, Katrin. Hi, everyone. So I'm part of the relationship team in the Thames Valley area, and also sit on the board for the sustainability for the region. And what we started doing, as Amelia correctly pointed out, first of all, we needed to get our house in order. So we pledged to be a purpose-led bank at the beginning of 2020. And since then, we've done lots of training and started developing products and services to help our customers to become more sustainable. And me personally, apart from working with local organizations like Ethical Reading, and Chris at Motorsports UK is one of my customers. Thank you for participating today. But we started talking to every single customer about sustainability climate in order to understand whether there is a strategy in place, and encourage them to start thinking about their strategy. Because ultimately, within the supply chain, sooner or later, their customers and suppliers will start asking those questions. And it could have a detrimental effect on the business if suddenly our customers start losing the projects and customers because they are not sustainable, because they don't have that qualification. So we started talking to our customers to encourage them to think about their strategy. And as Mark pointed out, we started developing lots of products for our customers to help with the transition. So we partner with Octopus Energy, where we help our customers to install charge points. We're developing a couple of products to help customers to track their carbon. There are lots of other products and services that are currently piloted that we're looking to launch to our customers. So by no means, as a relationship team, we deem ourselves be climate professional, but we want to encourage our customers to start thinking about it and setting their climate strategy going forward.
Thanks very much, Alina. Can I just do a quick question to Bill? Because I'm aware that nobody has asked anything to Bill yet, but I've got a question here from John Booth. So he's asking, what is the reality of the targets in terms of numbers? So he said, how accurate is simulation of relationship between future emissions and future temperature rises? So if a 2-degree emission scenario is achieved, what will the actual outcome be? Will it be more than 2 degrees? Will it be, what will the actual scenario be, and how accurate is that, the link?
That's a very good question, and we do indeed. When I was speaking, I just threw these numbers around as if they were precise numbers. So yeah, the answer is there around about 0.5 degree uncertainty in it. So when it actually comes down to making these targets, what we usually say is there's a certain percentage chance of it being met. So, for instance, I think the current, the most optimistic target has a slightly over 50% chance of staying within 2 degrees. So that's how we prefer, from a scientist's point of view, of phrasing these as saying, okay, those emissions are 2 degrees. We could say they have a certain percentage chance of leading us to a future below 2 degrees. That's, I think, a better way of thinking about it. So yeah, you're right. It's what we, so if we aim for one, if we're on a scenario of 2 degrees, we could end up at 2.5 degrees. Yeah, just because of our uncertainties and how the climate reacts.
So maybe we need to aim a little bit lower than we hope to actually stand.
Yeah, so I think often the aim is to go for about a 66% chance of staying below a limit. That's tend to be the way we think about things. So the carbon budgets we usually give are for a 66% chance of staying below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees.
And a quick follow-up question. Do you have any views on carbon pricing as a way to encourage meeting those targets?
So, I mean, I'm not an economist, but obviously that is a way of doing it. There has to be some way of limiting the total amount of carbon people could emit. Because, I went back to think it's the total we emit has to be limited. So anything we can do to put some limit on that, if it's a financial limit, then that could be a way of doing it. But yeah, So imposing a yearly budget of carbon and then people buying credits for that is a way of doing it, but I'm not an economist to say whether it's the best way.
Thank you. Gurpreet, I'm aware that we're now going past 2 p.m. So do you want to wrap up? We have got more questions that we can ask, but...
I think we need to wrap up now because people will be going back into out of their lunch slot. So a huge thank you to our panelists for a very enlightening session. So thank you very much, Mark, Chris, Bill, Amelia. Really, really interesting insights into how NatWest are addressing the challenge, Motorsport UK, and also what the science is telling us. The key thing that businesses should be doing today, which I took from Amelia, was actually having a plan around climate strategy, identify somebody who's somebody like Chris, for example, at Motorsport, who's passionate about sustainability, and start developing that plan. And even if it's one page, it's better than nothing, and it focuses minds, and you can build on it over time. And there are lots of resources locally, like Reading Climate Action Network and other groups, Ethical Reading, that you can reach out to, like the Sustainability Champions, to share knowledge and get more information. I'd just like to share the final screen. And wrap up. So thank you very much for joining us today. Please do remember to fill out the evaluation form. You will get a link to it through the chat window. We take these seriously, and we're very keen to continue to improve each of these sessions as we go forward. So thank you very much for filling the form out. Do check out our website, in particular the sustainability programs, and you can sign up for our mailing list for future events like this and other things that we do. Tag us and see us on social media. We do have a YouTube channel, and this recording will be posted on there in a few days' time. And we have an urban tree planting program called Trees for Reading, that actually Catherine leads. And if you'd like to donate to that, that would be most welcome too. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.